Hello, welcome to the Awakening Report. I'm your host, Doug Hamp. So glad to have you with us today. We have a special guest from Israel. He is going to share with us his amazing research. Yair Davidi is his name, and he's going to share with us the research on the lost 10 tribes of Israel. So we're very excited to get to that. Just to let you know, we are going to be having a conference here in Denver August 4th through the 6th, and we hope that you will join us. So go to denverprophecysummit.com to check that out. We'd also ask you to just go ahead and hit that little subscribe button right there on your screen. And if you want to, there's a little bell. You can click on that and you'll get notified when new teachings come out. So we'd love to have you be part of that. If you want to support this ministry and this show, there's a little button right at the top there that says Patreon. You can click on that and it'll take you to the page and it explains all about it. And we got a little video there for you to check that out. So we'd love to have you join us. Again, we have Yair Davidi from Jerusalem. He is joining us live, and so we are just excited to have him. Hello, Yair.
How are you? Shalom.
Shalom. Shalom. How is Jerusalem today?
It's nice. I'm not actually in. I'm just on the outside of Jerusalem, and it's a sunny day. It's a night. The weather is fine. It's a little bit warm, but it's good for this time of the year. And,
That's good.
Everything's fine.
I remember living there, and the weather report was funny because it said tomorrow without any change. Machar bli shinui. That's all it said. Tomorrow no change, and that was basically the weather report for the 3 years that I was there. And but beautiful countries, and just glad for you to join us. So, Yair, you have been doing research for quite a while on the lost 10 tribes of Israel. First of all, give us just a brief intro about who you are, and then let's jump into your research.
Okay, so I was born in Australia, like Gavin. I came from Australia. I was born Jewish, and but I was brought up in a non-religious environment, non-Jewish environment. At some stage, when I became an adult, I began to become more interested in Judaism. So I moved to Israel. In Israel, I learned in the yeshiva and rabbinical institutions. And there I came across information that seemed to indicate that the lost 10 tribes were amongst Western nations. Already in Australia, I became associated with this notion. And in Australia, I'd attempted to clarify it for myself, to go into it more deeply, but I didn't get very far. But it had interested me. And then, whilst I was in the yeshiva, I kept on coming across different sources in Jewish writings, such as rabbinical writings, such as the writings of Rashi, commentaries on the Bible, and so on. It seemed to indicate that there might be something in the concept. Also, I was a follower of history. I constantly kept myself updated with related historical research, with historical findings, with contemporary affairs. And every now and again, something would come along that would jar this consciousness in me and arouse a question as to whether or not the Austrian tribes were amongst Western peoples or were not. Eventually, I decided to, for my own sake, to do some research on the subject and to see what I came up with. And I did so, and I found myself getting more and more involved in it. I went to the Hebrew Library in Jerusalem. They have a very world standard. They have in the Jerusalem and the Hebrew University, Brit-Am. They have the major library for all of Israel. It's of European standard, a very high standard, with thousands of books.
I've been to that library. That's a beautiful library. All the books are pretty much, for the most part, hidden, and you have to tell them what you want, and then they bring the books to you.
That's right. They have a card index, and they let you take so many books per hour. But after a while, I got to know them and let me take more books than was usually allowed. So I got to know other parts of the library, the rare book section, and so on. And you could say divine providence helped me. I kept on coming across sources that helped this research, and I built up a whole body of research. And eventually, I prepared manuscripts for books on this work, and received funds or received a loan from a rabbi to put out the first book, The Tribes. And one could say after a while, I developed one could say a community of followers, and more information kept coming in, and it kept being revealed to us until now we have a larger body of information proving that the Lost End tribes are amongst Western nations.
Wow.
This information is derived from biblical sources, from rabbinical commentators on the Bible that show us, first of all, that our interpretation of the Hebrew script is consistent, is okay. It's not something that we're just imagining or something that cannot be relied upon. We have other authorities greater than us who confirm our interpretation of the text. Also, they have additional ideas, additional opinions as to where the Lost Ten Tribes were, which, together with historical sources and legends and various other sources, all point in the same direction that Lost Ten Tribes were and are amongst Western nations. We also use archaeology, mythology, linguistics, historical writings, any source whatsoever that could have something pertinent to the subject. We have gone into it and we've come up with sources all pointing in the same direction from all different directions, and all leading to the one conclusion: identifying the Lost Ten Tribes as people in Western nations. We don't say, first of all, we don't say that everyone in those places belongs to Lost Ten Tribes. We don't really know, but we can say that the Lost Ten Tribes were in those regions, and that they are the regions where they gave expression to their Israelite identity as predicted, and where something of an Israelite consciousness existed, at least at a subconscious level, one could say. In other words, they gave expression to their destiny as Israelites, as it was predicted in the Bible they would do.
Now, let me just ask you really quick. Would you consider these people Jewish, or do you consider them Israelite? Is there a distinction in your mind?
Oh, yes, is quite a distinction. They're not Jewish. They're not Jewish. The word Jew is derived from Judah. Originally had 12 tribes of Israel. The 12 tribes of Israel divided into two different sections. In the north were the 10 tribes. They're referred to in the Bible as Ephraim, as Joseph, sometimes as the kingdom of Israel, in some texts as Samaria, after their leading capital, the leading province. And they were quite distinct from the southern kingdom, which was centered around Jerusalem. We had the tribes of Judah and Benjamin and Levi. And afterwards, you had refugees from all of the tribes also come to the south, so that the entity, the polity, the kingdom of Judah did contain representatives of all of the tribes. The dominant tribe in the south was Judah, and therefore from the kingdom of Judah came, one could say, the major section of the present Jewish people descend from the kingdom, people who were in the kingdom of Judah. The majority of the Israelite nation were in the north. They were taken away by the Assyrians, and they lost consciousness of their ancestry. But they remain together physically as cohesive entities that we may identify. And this should not be so surprising, because even before they were exiled, they had in effect ceased to become Jews in our sense of the word. They had ceased to keep the commandments, or they kept the commandments, they kept aspects of what one could call Judaism, or the Mosaic laws, but they was syncretized with pagan concepts. They had ceased to keep circumcision. There were a lot of differences, and in some degree they were in effect, one could say, non-Jewish. And even the prophet Hosea speaks of it. He says, "You are not my people, you shall not be my people." Also Jeremiah speaks of it, "I've divorced you." And the prophets, while saying this, saying that in effect they were divorced, prophets also emphasized it in the end times, at some stage in the future, in the distant future, they would be reconciled with God. They would be once again accepted as the people of Israel. It was in effect as if they were suspended. Their spiritual association as Israelites, as Jews, one could say, was, to say, suspended. And this is confirmed by rabbinical discussions concerning them. Yevamot 17 and other places discusses it. It's also brought down in Jewish law that, in effect, members of the Lost Ten Tribes are not legally considered Jewish. That is, they are not bound by the law at the present stage. But there's another principle that in the future they will be re-accepted. They will once again come back. They will return both physically and spiritually. Now, how this, there's the discussions on this, biblical verses concerning it. But actually, how it will come about, no one really knows. And that is not, we know, we take this as a principle, and things happen. And this is not really, it's not really our task to, I do not consider it part of my task, or part of all the people who around me do not consider it part of our task to occupy ourselves with this. What concerns us is who they are, because they, divine providence, as you say, had its own reasons for this. Would you like me to explain how we see what the divine providence?
Yes, please. Please, yes, go on.
So this is how I see it. This is how we see it from the different sources. We understand that originally the Israelites came out of Egypt. Okay, they were in Egypt. They were in Egypt. They did not have the law in Egypt. They did not have this before the time of Moses. Then they came out of Egypt and they received the Torah and the Moses in the wilderness. And the original intention of the Bible, if you look at the Bible, was that they should enter the land, keep the law, establish a kingdom, and somehow to bring all of the peoples of the earth to worship the one true God and to keep aspects of the commandments. There's discussions as to which, not necessarily all of the commandments, but to be subservient to the God of Israel through the direction of the Israelite nations. This is what their original task could be considered to have been.
Mm-hmm.
But it was, one could say...
Doug?
Yes, sir.
Doug, I'd just like to point out that Yair has a wonderful book he began his research with, and that's the tribes. And when I met Yair back in 2007, we did an interview at the hotel in Jerusalem, and Yair and I had a wonderful conversation, and that conversation is on YouTube. And Yair, have you had a few people comment about the YouTube? Has that helped your studies? And
no, I get frequent comments and compliments on the interview. It was very successful. Since then, I've done a lot of YouTube interviews, given a lot of talks on the YouTube. The one I did with you was the most successful. I was never able to repeat the success we had, at least in the number of viewers, and everything was against it. We did it in a busy place with people going backwards and forth and people talking in the background. But there was something about it that had that
yes.
And by the way, we have Gavin Finley with us.
Yeah.
Just want to say I'm glad you're Gavin Finley. I forgot to introduce him. I'm so sorry, but we do have Dr. Gavin Finley with us, and he will be sharing at the conference as well. So just wanted to recognize you and thank you for being here as well, Gavin. But Yair, please go on with your research. This is really interesting, and I'm glad that Gavin brought up your book. That's very important for people that want to get that. So go on. This is intriguing.
So as we understand it, it was too big for at the time, the world situation, the situation of the Israelites, it was too big for them, the whole plant, what is it to say. They couldn't carry it through, and they evolved. They became, they conquered the land, they conquered the whole area. There was a period of the judges and the period of Saul, then of David, of Solomon. And Solomon ruled over a good portion of the earth. He was the wisest king who ever lived, but even Egypt wasn't able to fulfill the task that was set upon him. And towards the end of his reign, he began to follow after the advice of his foreign wives and the worship of foreign gods, or allow the worship of foreign gods. And in the time of his son Rehoboam, the 10 tribes split apart. The 10 tribes set up their own kingdom under Jeroboam, the son of Nebat. And different biblical passages indicate that there was a plan for this. When the tribes divided, the King Rehoboam, the son of Solomon, wanted to get his people together, his army, and go after them, chase them, and fight them, and bring them back by force. the prophet came to him and said, you shall not do this. This thing is from me. There's a reason for it. And we understand the reason to have...
Yes, could you explain a little bit about what that big breakup was at the breach of Jeroboam? And this is back in 922. And it seems that in Christian chords, we don't have a real good understanding of what really that big fight was all about. Could you shed some light on that for us?
So we are told that when Solomon died, apparently towards the end of the reign of King Solomon, he had begun to tax the people. The taxes were quite burdensome. And then he passed away, and his son Rehoboam in English, became king. And representatives from all of the tribes came to Rehoboam, and they asked him if he would take more consideration of their needs, and have some type of alleviation in the burden that was being placed upon them. And Rehoboam was advised by the elders to placate the people, to come to meet them, to give them something. And then they would follow after him. They would follow after him forever. They would always be subservient to him, and his reign would be successful. But then he went to counsel from the younger men who he'd grown up with, the younger members of the court. And they said, no, show his boss. Tell them that if my father had beaten you to some degree, I'll do it. Even had beaten you with a certain type of whip, I'll beat you with an even stronger type, a more powerful one. And tell them who is boss. Assert yourself. And so he did. So the 10 of the tribe, out of the 12 tribes, split apart, and under Jeroboam, who was already some type of leader of theirs, they set up their own kingdom. Whereas Judah and Benjamin remained faithful, centered around Jerusalem, and Jeroboam had set up his own kingdom, but they still kept the laws. And every 3 times a year, the people used to go up to Jerusalem to worship at the temple. So Jeroboam saw this. He said that sooner or later, they're going up to the temple, they're going up to worship in Jerusalem. Sooner or later, they're going to reconsider what they have done. They're going to want to reunite with Judah, and I will lose my kingdom. Therefore, he set up 2 centers of worship, one in Bethlehem, one in Dan, where he had statues of golden calves. And he said, from now on, these are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of Egypt. And now, by golden calves, it wasn't necessarily 100% idolatry. He may have intended that these were representatives of some power of God Almighty, but to which the people should direct themselves. But all events, it was not biblically, it was not something, and it was a biblical injunction. It was against the rules of the Bible. And this led to idolatry. And so the people, from then on, they went down, they degenerated and became more and more affected and influenced by the peoples around them, more and more pagan, until a few hundred years later, the Assyrians conquered them and took them away in stages. And first of all, they took away the tribes who were east of the Jordan. Then they took away the tribes who were east of the Jordan. Then they took away the tribes who were west of the Jordan, and they resettled them in different groups in different portions of the Assyrian Empire. Some they took overland. Most of them they took overland to areas now Mesopotamia, the Caucasus area, south of the Caucasus, all that region, northern Syria, Azerbaijan, Armenia, all that region that the Israelites were settled in. In those areas, the Israelites confederated with other peoples, or became identified with other peoples. They are known as the Cimmerians, the Scythians, the Goths. They also worked for the Assyrians. Some of the Assyrians made some of them slaves, had them working in quarries. We have pictures of them. Others they assimilated into the Assyrian establishment. The Assyrians even took over whole groups of charioteers, whole units of charioteers, and incorporated them into their army. There were generals who were Israelites, and they're serving the Assyrian forces. and they amalgamated, intermixed with other peoples, and the Syrian Empire began to fall apart. At one stage, as Israelites who were identifiable as Scythians or combined with Scythians took over the Syrian Empire for a short period of about 20 years, 26 years or so. But then they lost it, and the Assyrians reasserted themselves, and then they destroyed. Then the Assyrian Empire was destroyed by Israelites, Babylonians, and Medes together.
Yair, I have a quick question for you. Do you think that the Rav Shakah that came and spoke to Hezekiah, and they said, "Speak to your servants in Yudaiti," do you think that may have been that person could actually speak Hebrew? Do you think he might have been from the Northern Kingdom?
It could have been. I understand that there's a rabbinical source that says that he was actually a renegade son of Hezekiah.
Oh, really? Wow. Okay. Interesting. Okay, sorry to interrupt.
But anyway, it's along the lines of what you were thinking of. It was someone of Israelite stock.
Yeah. And while we're at it, could you just check your microphone, the plug that goes into your computer? There may be just kind of a bad connection. I'm afraid we're hearing some feedback. Some buzzing.
I'm not hearing anything on this side.
You're not hearing any buzzing?
No.
Okay. Oh, well, now it's worse. But if you're not hearing it, then maybe it's just in my ears. Okay. Well, that's good. All right. So, perfect. So, continue on, please.
So the Israelites were so that was one section. Those Israelites who had been taken overland, they were eventually driven out of the Middle East and went to the north, and from there, in groups, they moved westward. There'd also been another section who had been taken away in ships. Amos speaks about it. Amos speaks about Israelites being taken away in ships of the Philistines and ships of the Phoenicians of Tyre. That is of the Phoenicians, and resettled in other areas. Isaiah also refers to it. Like, there are biblical sources, and we also find archaeological evidence that, in addition to the Israelites who were taken overseas, some of them were taken by ships and resettled in colonies in the west, in what is now southwest Spain, the British Isles, Scandinavia. And there too a similar process took place. First, they worked for the Assyrians. They supplied tin. Suddenly, there's a surfeit of tin and of silver in Assyria. The coinage had to change. We find the economic science of this. This is not what I'm saying. Is not entirely a discovery on my own. This is conventional archaeologists, in broad lines, agree with what we are saying, or we take it from what conventional archaeologists are now saying, together with the biblical passages. So it is academically acceptable that Israelites were settled in the West and under colonies that would be taken to the West by.
Yair, could you comment on the movement of the lost tribes north of the Caucasus into the steppes, and the possible push of the hordes north of the Caucasus, the Mongol invasion and so forth? There were huge bands of horsemen there, and it was no place for a peaceful agrarian type of people like the Israelites to be up there, when there was no security and there was no place of peace between the valleys where they could raise their agriculture and so forth. Is there an agricultural story to the movement westwards as well, and perhaps the story of the Gog people up in the steppes pushing the Israelites westwards into Europe?
Yes and no. There is, as you say, this did take place. We identified the Israelites with the groups known as the Cimmerians, who actually were in the steppe area, but went westward at an early stage, already about 600, 500 BCE. They went westward and they intermerged with the people of Celtic civilization. They helped create Celtic civilization as it came to came to become known as we recognize it in history. And they eventually also moved from the first in Central Europe, then they moved to what's now France. From there they moved to the British Isles, and that was where they had their centre. That was where they gave expression to themselves. Actually, they were known. We call them Celts. We call the people in the West Celts. That is the name we give to them after the name the Romans had given to them. Actually, they call themselves Hebrews.
Regarding, don't we have a lot of literature and music associated with the Celts and the music of Enya and Lorena McKinnon? This music indicating a lost state, and they're sort of wafting in paganism through Europe, and they're searching, they're looking at other gods, and they're in deep idolatry. And of course, we lost the scriptures when we went to Constantine in 325. So we had a terrible state of scriptural famine during the Dark Ages, and that may have well caused part of the Dark Ages of the West. These are the elements of literature that that come into the story as well. Don't you believe that there's some evidence there as well?
There's evidence in Celtic legends, in Irish legends, also in Scottish legends, Welsh legends as well, concerning that indicate that they are descended from the Hebrews. Also, linguists find what they call a Semitic substratum in the language of the insular Celts, or the Celts from the Western Isles. In other words, they originally spoke a tongue, a language was similar to Hebrew. And on that was superimposed a Indo-European type tongue, which gave them the grammar and the overall structure, but the vocabulary and also elements of their grammar, of the way they spoke, still showed Hebrew origins. And this is accepted. This is accepted by linguists that what they call Afro-Asiatic substratum exists in Celtic languages. Which is consistent with them have originally spoken the Hebrew language and haven't changed it to a European type tongue. And we have and this is not only in language, but in a lot of things, in customs and in the things they made, even the way the use of an animal, the use of certain implements. All of this relates back to what had been known in the Middle East, or had Middle Eastern antecedents from the region of Israel. Also, they call themselves Iberi. They have the word Hibernia, a name for island. They have the Hebrides Islands. On the maps of Ptolemy was a geographer, a pagan geographer, which is important because he wasn't influenced not by Christian sources, not by Jewish sources. He would write down what he knew from the geography of those areas, names of people, names of areas. And he often gives them Hebrew names, or names which are similar to names found in the Bible. So this too is a proof. Also, we find proofs in other directions. We find one of the peoples we identify as being descended from the Israelites are the people settled in Holland, which is now Holland, Netherlands. And the blessing of Jacob to Zebulun, we identify to one of the tribes, was Zvulun the Chav Yamim Yishkon. Zvulun would dwell on the shores of the sea. In Hebrew. Zvulun the Chav Yamim Yishkon, Zvulun would dwell on the shores of the sea. Ptolemy, in his geography, he mentions a people called Sabulun Goy with an S, Sabulun Goy, the area of the Netherlands. In other words, Goy means people. Zabulon is another form of the name Zebulun. He's saying that the people named the people of Zebulun lived in that area. And what do we find in that region? We find in that region that most of the country, 2/3 of the country, is below sea level. The earth is sand, sea sand, and they need dikes to keep out the water. and 1/3 of the area is underneath, below the sea, and another third would be subject to periodic flooding if it was not for the dikes that they have. In other words, 2/3 of the country is on the, literally speaking, on the seashores. It's just where we find the people called Zebulun, called people of Zebulun. And this is where that prophecy was fulfilled, and there's only place in the world where this holds.
Let me just ask, just to clarify. So you're going back to the prophecy given by Jacob in Genesis 49, and he says, Zebulun shall dwell by the haven of the sea. He shall become a haven for ships, and his border shall adjoin Sidon. So you're suggesting that that's the Netherlands?
Yes.
Okay.
In Hebrew, it says the Hof Yamim, doesn't say haven. Haven is
Okay.
it's a possible translation.
Okay.
But it's not
The
the only
Hof.
translation. It can also be translated to be, as most Hebrew speakers would now understand it, to mean the shores of the sea.
Okay, fair enough. I'm okay with that. I agree with you. Hof does mean seashore, so fair enough. Interesting. What about Sidon? How do you interpret that?
We interpret that people from of Phoenician culture did settle in that area. They settled in France, they settled in Belgium, and so they settled in areas around about. So the border shall be on to Sidon. Descendants of Sidonites were also in that region, and they bordered the area.
Wow. And you're also suggesting that the word Iberia comes from the word Iver or Ivrit, right? Like,
Yes,
okay.
as you know, you're in the Hebrew University.
Yes.
University Ivrit, that's it in Hebrew.
Yep.
Ivrit means Hebrew.
Okay.
The word, but also you also know that the V sound, the V sound, can also become a B.
Absolutely. Yes, of course.
It depends on the phonetical usage.
Right.
It doesn't affect the meaning.
Right.
So in European context, the European surroundings, they instead of saying Ivrit, they said Ibri or Iberi, which also in Hebrew, you can also find it used in that way.
Well, it goes back to Eber, right? I mean, it goes back to the origin of the word Eber, right?
Yes, there are in the biblical commentators have a discussion of where the word did come from. But the bottom line is that we know that it was a name that the Hebrews applied to themselves and other people applied it to themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Joseph is recorded a Hebrew boy. That's how Joseph is described.
Yes.
We find several times in the Bible, Jonah calls himself, I'm a Hebrew, and I worship the God who made heaven and earth. Jonah, when he was captured by the sailors, that's how he described himself to foreign people.
Mm-hmm.
As a Hebrew. Hebrew was the name they used for themselves. In Hebrew, we find this name. They always gave their name to the Iberian Peninsula, as you say, also to the Hibernia or the Ibernia and the Hibernian Sea, and the Iberni in Britain. And to people all over what is now France, we have names, Brit-Am, all kinds of place names from that area that the Romans gave us, that the people had a use for that region, showing that Eber was an ethnic mononym. It was a name applied to different peoples, and it distinguished the people who had that name as belonging to an ethnic group. In other words, Hebrew was the name they gave themselves, and Hebrew was the name they were known by, even after they had been exiled, even after they had forgotten where they came from.
That's amazing. Are there any other theories for where the word Iberia may have come from? I mean,
there are theories, like everything you have theories. Some people say it comes from the yew tree. They used to say that the Druids, the Druid religion, they held the yew tree to be sacred. Other people have different theories, have different ideas. Mistletoe, and they're not really very strong. They don't really know. They themselves admit this conjecture.
Okay.
There are works that they admit, in effect, or major authorities amongst people who study this subject admit that it was a name used in ethnic connotations, used for the people, used for themselves. Where exactly it came from, they're not sure. They make different suggestions based on the names that are similar to it. that might possibly have had relevance to it, but they cannot come up with anything for certain. The Irish sources do relate it back to their ancestors, or one of their ancestors who had that name, which is similar to what the Bible says, how the Bible relates his name Ivri, where the name Ivri comes from. Abraham the Ivri, Abraham the Ivri, Abraham the Hebrew, it says.
Mm-hmm.
And this, where the bottom line is that this was the name that the Hebrews used for themselves. The Israelites used this name for themselves, and other foreign peoples knew them by that name. We still find their name in usage. And this is one sign. If it was one sign, you might say it's a coincidence. Some people do have different peoples do sometimes come up with similar names for themselves. But you take one coincidence here, a coincidence there, and hundreds of different so-called coincidences, and they put them all together, and you come up with an absolute identity.
Fair enough. I'm very persuaded by the whole word of Iber and Iberia. I mean, that makes perfect sense to me, but I'm probably biased, so I'm just trying to double check here. So, go on. This is fascinating.
So how we see it, the whole task of the exile was in order that the Israelite, that one section of the Israelite nation should keep the Torah, develop the Torah and the oral law and so on. That was the Jewish section. Another section should go down to the level of the Gentiles and evolve upwards and bring the whole of the Gentile world with it. And that, in effect, is what happened historically. We identify the lost Gentiles as peoples who settled in the British Isles, who colonized North America, Australia, New Zealand. The people, also peoples who settled in France, settled in Holland, settled in Belgium, who settled in Scandinavia. And from these areas came you had the British Empire, the Dutch Empire, the French Empire. Also now we have America, which is also a cultural empire. And all of these nations spread their influence over all of the earth. And relatively speaking, despite the fact that they were out to make a quick buck, you could say they wanted to make money, they were out for their own interests. They also had altruistic motives, altruistic factors were also there. There was something they knew that they had some type of civilizing task, manifest destiny to fulfill, and they did fulfill it to some degree. Even now, if God forbid anywhere in the world there is a disaster, or one nation is persecuting the other or exterminating the other, so the chances are that no one will interfere. There's also a chance that America will interfere, or a combined group of France and Britain will send soldiers in there and try and do something. These are the nations who do something amongst the non-Israelite peoples, and they do help them. They do elevate them. We also had the Green Revolution, which America, thanks to America, the Green Revolution. A lot of people never heard of this, but this happened in my lifetime, in your lifetime. You're a bit younger than me, but not unduly so, one could say. There was in Indonesia, in India, throughout Asia, there were problems with crops. So the crops weren't produced, the harvests weren't big enough. They were prone to pests, so prone to all kinds of problems. People were starving to death. So American scientists, they got groups of American scientists and put them got them together and had them produce new crops, new ways of production. And hundreds of millions of people are now alive because of that. This is one thing they've done, and you can look it up. It's on there. It's well known. I'm not telling secrets here. Even though most people are not aware of it, you can look up the Green Revolution on the web. You'll see a lot of articles about it, explaining it. It's telling you with detail, much more detail, what I've just told you. And this is one thing out of very many things which these groups of people as a whole have done, have contributed to humanity. And this, according to different sources that we have found, also is hinted at in the book of Hosea, in Jeremiah, in different areas, that this was what they would do. They would become a light to the nations. And this is what they have done. But in order to do this, they had to become like unto the nations. at the time when they were in the land of Israel, the peoples of the world were not ready to change, and they themselves were not in a state where they could bring about any change. So this is how we understand the plan of divine providence. This is what we understand the Bible to say. Also, Jewish sources confirm what we have said, and it may not be 100% like that. You can look it up, check it out for yourself, check out the different sources, but it's certainly along those lines in general.
Yeah, I'm wondering if you could touch on some more of the linguistic correlations between words that we find in Hebrew and some of the name places or people names that we find throughout history. I remember reading about some of these, and I find them very fascinating. How you would explain or how you would understand some of these name places and or people names.
So you have Denmark, the country of Denmark. Denmark means Danmark. The mark means is German, means border. The borderland or the country of Denmark. That's one very prominent proof. The kind of Denmark, as we said, we had Sibyl and Goy, which we find in ancient times on the borders lands. We find different names concerning the Israelite tribes. We find that the Israelite tribes tended to not only when they were exiled, they were exiled in groups. They had cohesive entities. They retained something of their tribal ancestry. And also, if you look in the book of Numbers, also in the book of Genesis towards the end, it has a list of the 70 sons of Jacob. And afterwards, we found in the book of Numbers that these 70 sons of Jacob have become tribal clans within the tribes. And after that, we find throughout the Bible, throughout in the book of Kings, in the book of Chronicles, references to these tribes. So archaeologists have found in the land of Israel, different areas of the land of Israel, pottery sherds with pieces of pottery with the names of tribal elements, showing that these did become clan names amongst the people. And they kept some of these clan names. So we trace these clan names, and the indications are that more in a very general, very rough way, the tribes stay together or they recoalesce. In other words, different groups who are descended from the same tribe tended over the course of time to come back together. We can identify different areas as having been dominated by specific tribes. I'll give you you asked for an example. I'll give you an example for Sweden. Sweden, according to Swedish history, Sweden was founded, came into existence when two nations called the Goths and the Svea. The Svea came together, united. The Svea were also known as Sweon. That is how Tacitus, a Roman historian, gives their name. That's how he gives their name. And this name, Goth, in Hebrew, can be another form of the name Gad. Not only that, we find among the Goths of Sweden the use of Gad, or this root Gad, Gimel Dalet, as an alternative for the name God. So you were in Israel. You met the Temanite Jews whilst you were in Israel. So you notice that the Hebrew is a little bit different from ours, from the conventional pronunciations. And some, many think that their Hebrew way of pronouncing Hebrew is more closer to the original. So they have a way of a dalet, which is similar to a Scandinavian dalet. A dalet, I mean a D. In Scandinavian tongues, in Germanic tongues, you have a D, which sometimes can be pronounced as a fa. A fa sound. Da.
Yes.
And you have the same thing in Hebrew. Also in Gad, the name Gad, the Holam, which gives us the A sound, can be pronounced by the Temani, and also by Ashkenazi Jews as O. So you take so in other words, the name Gad could also be pronounced as Goth. Goth is another way of pronouncing the name Gad. And so when we said that Sweden came into existence, when the two separate entities, the Goths and the Svea, came together, Sweon, also known as Sweon, one of the sons of Gad, one of the clans of Gad, was known as the Shuon. And Shuon is practically in in effect the same. I have these two people coming together. The sons of Gad were Areli. Areli was the name, was one of the sons of Gad. And the Harels, the Hareloi, which is in effect the same. There was also a group in Scandinavia associated with the Swedes and the Goths. The Harudi is another segment of Gad. And they had the Harudi in Scandinavia associated with the Goths. And all of the sons of Gad are found in this region under the same names as tribal groups who are known in history and were associated with Sweden or with the Goths or with that area somehow or other. And not, I mean, go through all of the tribes. This is what the book, the tribes that Gavin showed you. This book goes through all of the different tribes in every tribe and all the names, the clan names, and shows how this process is repeated, so that you have an overall pattern that repeats itself and shows that divine providence wanted the individual tribes to recongregate and to give expression to their tribal ancestry, to who they were, and so this is the way it goes. We have the tribal symbols, tribal symbols. We find that the name America. Do you know where the name America comes from?
I don't know. I'm really curious.
Okay, you have the name America. If you look it up in the encyclopedias, you'll find it a sailor, a navigator called Amerigo Vespucci from northern Italy. He, first of all, Columbus discovered America, or rediscovered America, it doesn't matter. Columbus brought attention to the existence of America to Europe. He is accredited with discovering America. At first, he wasn't sure if it was a separate land. It was not certain if it was a separate land or part of Asia. They didn't know. Amerigo Vespucci was the one who sailed all around the American continents and proved that it was a separate landmass.
Mm-hmm.
And he drew up a map, and on the back of the map, he wrote his name, Americo, America. It was pronounced as his name was Americo, but it could be pronounced as America. On the back of his map, or the person drawing the map did it for him. All events, one could say, through by accident, the name America became attached to America, to the whole of American continent.
Yeah, I remember that history. That's good. Mm-hmm.
But in common, the America actually, in common everyday speech, when we say America, we think of the USA. Even though it means that geographically, it means the whole continent, or the two continents, North and South America. But when you say America, people think of the USA, and that's what comes to mind.
Yes.
And we find a concentration of, as we said, of different tribes in the British Isles. People from all of the tribes came to the British Isles, but they were dominated by people from Joseph. Amongst Joseph, you had the two sections. Ephraim, two sub-tribes or two divisions, Ephraim and Manasseh. Areas that somehow or other we can associate with the Manasseh were those from which the earliest settlers, the English settlers of the USA came from, associated with Manasseh. The son of one of the firstborn son of Manasseh in the Bible is called Machir. We have this name Machir, and here, and we have a Jew. There's a new book came out concerning it was a Jewish kingdom in southern France. I'm getting sorry for going all over the place, but it'll all come together. And some say in the Middle Ages, there's a Jewish kingdom in southern France which had its own autonomous region, ruled over by a Jewish prince called Machir in Hebrew, or Ha-Machiri. Ha-Machiri in Hebrew means the descendants, followers of Machir. But in Jewish writings, they took this name Ha-Machiri and used it as a nickname for this person called Machir. Okay? Mm-hmm. He was also important amongst the Gentiles. He went to wars. He became a saint. They made him a saint in the Catholic Church, even though he was Jewish, and they changed it, made a few changes here and there. And he became quite popular in local legends. And his name was written down as Americo, because Ha-Machiri is a Hebrew name. It's a little bit difficult for people of Europeans to pronounce, so they switched around a few of the syllables and came up with the name America.
Interesting.
And the name became popular in that region, and eventually America received the name, and he gave the name to America. But you could say that through this whole chain of events, it was destined that America should receive the name Ham and Gavin, the firstborn son of Manasseh. And this is where we find the predominance of people from Manasseh in America. You believe in divine providence, so you could say that the name meaning Machia, the son of Manasseh, was the name that America received.
Interesting.
So
Wow.
in the midrash, it says that it gives the symbols of the tribes. So it says that the symbol of Joseph had actually three symbols. Joseph together, Ephraim and Manasseh together, when they were together, had a symbol which is a picture of Egypt. And Manasseh, when he was alone, had a symbol which was a ram, some type of unicorn. Of Joseph was a bull. But Joseph, when he was together, is a picture of Egypt. And when you, what symbol could you think of when you look at you think of Egypt? A pyramid. Yeah. Take out a dollar bill and you see the Great Seal. What do you see on the great? What is the Great Seal?
Yeah.
A pyramid representing the USA. In other words, the symbol of Joseph is the official symbol of the USA.
Interesting.
And you can say it's because they were Masons, or because of this, it was some part of European culture. It was all kinds of reasons, prosaic reasons you can give, or someone suggested it. I don't know. You can come up with all kinds of reasons, explanations as to why this seal exists, how they took this seal. But if you look at the bigger picture, divine providence so wanted it that way. And we go through all of the different tribal symbols, and we find similar phenomena and similar coincidences or correlations, and we see how they all come together and they all build up a composite picture. With each different section, each different proofs from all over the place, proofs from archaeology, from linguistics, proofs from rabbinical sources, proofs from the Bible, from the biblical texts, how they all interlock with each other and give us a complete picture, showing that the lost tribes are in that region, amongst those peoples. They had a role to play according to divine providence, as indicated by the biblical sources.
Mm-hmm. So basically, Isaiah 49, where it talks about, it says concerning Messiah, whoever you think that may be, but it says, "It is too small a thing that you should be my servant to raise up the tribes of Jacob and to restore the preserved ones of Israel. I will also give you as a light to the Gentiles, the nations, that you should be my salvation to the ends of the earth." Do you see that?
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Also, this word "ends of the earth." What does it mean, ends of the earth? Katzei Arts in Hebrew.
Mm-hmm.
Means geographical extremities. The ends of geographical extremities, when you take the land of Israel, as we find in Ezekiel, the land of Israel is the center of the earth. Tabu says, especially Jerusalem. And all the rest of the world emanates out from Jerusalem. So what are the geographical extremities? We have Scandinavia, we have the Netherlands, we have France, Britain, North America. And then to the southeast, we have Australia and New Zealand. And then you have South Africa. And all these areas are at the ends of, geographically speaking, they are at the ends of the earth. Not only that, but Isaiah himself, I think in Isaiah 41, he mentions, he also mentions us being at the ends of the earth. The ends of the earth, and in English it says the chief places thereof. In Hebrew it says Asileia. In Hebrew, Asil means noble or elevated or the best. So in other words, he's saying not only the ends of the earth, but the best places of the most salubrious climates at the ends of the earth. Because you could say the ends of the earth also means Siberia, Antarctica, places that are difficult to live in. But here it says the ends of the earth and Asileia, the best parts of the earth, those areas which are most conducive to human habitation. And that is where we find peoples whom we identify with the lost 10 tribes. Incidentally, you mentioned what Isaiah says that raise up the tribes of Jacob. Yeah? Mm-hmm. Jacob. What's the nickname for an American? Yank. Yank. And the name Jacob in Hebrew, you have an Ashkenazic Hebrew. You were in Israel, the different parts of different people, different Jewish communities.
Yes. Right.
Slightly different ways of traditionally of pronouncing Hebrew. Nowadays it's been standardized. Modern Hebrew, which everyone speaks, everyone knows. But in the different communities, Ashkenazi communities, Ammonite communities, Moroccan communities, all have slightly differences in the way they pronounce the names. So one of the names of pronouncing Yaakov is Yankov. You have Iron Yankov is a famous, well-known book, a collection of legends from the Talmud. Iron Yankov. Yankov is another way of pronouncing Yaakov. Also, the Temanim or the other Hebrew Jewish groups also have a way of pronouncing this with this iron sound as like Yankov, so they have Yankov. Yankov, and also amongst Ashkenazi Jews, Yank is short. Another way is the equivalent of Jake. Jack is short for Jacob. Yank doesn't matter what some. If you look it up in this, if you look up what the name Yank comes from, you might find it was the different explanations. Some people say it comes from the Indian tribe, or it's what the Indians used to pronounce the name Englishman, or it comes from something else. It doesn't really matter. Amongst Hebrew speakers, Yank is short for Jacob. In other words, the Americans are named after Jacob, if you take it that way. And that was the point you were speaking of, to raise up the tribes of Jacob, that was really their task and to be a light to the Gentiles.
Wow.
And also you have the principle, the biblical passages can sometimes be understood more than one way, and the different understandings can be instantaneously applicable. The Bible is written by God Almighty, and God Almighty knows how to write things that have more than one meaning, to more than one application, more than one context, and to be valid. Nevertheless, the different meanings to be equally valid, or to have validity in different associations.
Mm-hmm. Wow, this is astounding. I mean, it's just so much information, and I can see how your study of this topic has been very exciting, because it really takes you throughout the world and throughout history, to really see what happened to these 10 tribes, and then how, because they were not doing what God had mandated them to do, to be true to Him, to be true to His word. And so then actually through the judgment of the Assyrians, etc., then God used that to spread them throughout the entire world, to become that light to the entire planet. And through that, God is bringing about this redemption in ways that nobody could have ever have imagined possible.
Yes, this is the way. This is how divine providence works. This is the Bible. This is the Bible in action.
Wow, it's really astounding. It's just amazing. I have to ask, because as someone who studies the New Testament as well, it makes a lot of reference to the restoration of these two houses. And we may see differently on this, but it makes the suggestion that what happened through the life and death and resurrection of Yeshua was actually the restoration of these two houses, or at least let's call it maybe the beginning of that restoration, which will culminate in the reuniting of the two sticks, and so many other passages. Any thoughts on that?
So we obviously don't agree with you on most of those points. A few of those points we have different interpretations, but we do see Christianity as a tool of divine providence to arouse the consciousness of the world, and especially of the lost 10 tribes, in this direction, in the direction you're speaking of. So, in effect, we even though we disagree on those points, until the Messiah comes, we don't have to agree, because we agree on the general directions of the whole process and the reasons for it. And we also see, so you probably have from your own experience, that you can have a certain doctrine, and different people apply it in different ways. Christianity, a lot of people became Christians. Some people had their own way of interpreting it. Other people have their different way. Some people emphasize the Hebrew aspects of it. Others something else. So it could be that an inherent cultural and also even inherited genetic predisposition to use this tool in a certain way is also significant concerning the lost 10 tribes and their eventual return.
Interesting. Now, concerning these 10 tribes, do you think that they remained distinct groups? Were they assimilated like a drop of wine is assimilated into the ocean? Do you think maybe it's a little bit of both? Maybe there are some pockets of these people and they have been assimilated genetically, or what are your thoughts on that?
So, first of all, we go according to what the sources indicate. We are not claiming to have any inner knowledge. We go according to what our researchers indicate, and is, as you say, lost in tribes could be all over the place, or they could be concentrated in certain areas. Our understanding is that they were destined to become concentrated in specific regions. Somehow or other they kept together, and that they reconverge. It could be that for instance, our studies indicate that in the 1700s there were large migrations from Germany to the USA. In the 1700s, 1800s, whole villages got up and moved out and have eyewitness accounts. They had two villages, one beside the other. Both villages were in the same economic situation, the same social backgrounds. Members of one village all get up and go. Members of another village stay behind. The same phenomenon in Italy. And people who studied it at the time, eyewitnesses, that was the beginning of anthropological studies, of racial studies, one could say. They claimed that there were differences between those who were moving out and those who stayed behind. So we're not committed in this, but we take it as significant. That for instance, we even though in certain areas we find lost in tribes to have been the dominant groups, in other areas we find them to have been present but not dominant. From those regions where they were not dominant, such as Germany, our understanding is they all moved out, they all went to the USA, or the major proportion of them, of those who descend from Hebrews, did so. And this applies to other peoples who come to the USA or to other Israelite regions from other areas of Europe. That they too may well have been descended from Israelites or from Jews. Also, there were a lot of Jews who were assimilated or were forced to convert to Christianity, who were intermixed with the peoples. And our indications, Amos says, I will not let a drop, I will put you through the sieve of the nations. Not a drop of you will fall down. There's divine providence on these peoples. And there are things we don't understand. We just go according to what the scripture says and what historical indications lend us to comprehend.
Wow. You know, I once read that the word Yitzchak, which is Isaac, of course. I mean, you know that. I'm just saying it for my listeners. Yitzchak, that it may have morphed into other variations of that. One suggestion that it morphed into Saxon. I find that linguistically curious. I'm not sure if I am convinced, but maybe. Are there any other thoughts that you can, or any other ways that may have been morphed into other things like that?
So the name Yitzchak is in Hebrew with a Zadik, not an S.
Yitzchak. Right, Yitzchak. Mm-hmm.
But Amos, when Amos is speaking of the lost 10 tribes, he refers to them as Beit Yishach. This is a Shin instead of a Zadi. And he also refers, he uses his name, applies it to the lost 10 tribes as distinct from Judah. So here too we have an indication. And we have this name, which is already similar to Yishach Shachar, which eventually did become one of the forms of it was Saxon. So the Saxons could have received probably Anglo-Saxons received their name.
Let me just give that reference to people. It's Amos 7:9 for those who are interested. Amos 7:9. It says the high places of Isaac, and in Hebrew, as you say, Isaac is not spelled with a tzadi in this case. It's actually spelled with a sin, which tells us, and there's something very strange about that because it should be spelled with a tzaddik, as we have it in the book of Genesis, but here it is spelled with a sin. So Yitzhak, as you're saying. So just clarifying what you're saying.
Yes, so you probably know more than me, or know quite more than you're letting on about this whole.
I've done some research, but you're the expert here, so please go on.
So we have the names, all the names. You have the names. Angle became England. The Angles and the Saxons invaded England, but what became England. The name England comes from the name Angle. It means Angle land, the land of the Angles. Where does the name Angle come from? This is getting back to our same letter Ein. Sometimes could get an an sound, as we said that we found in the Titan concerning Jacob Yank, Jack Yank. So too we have incidentally the symbol of in Jeremiah. It refers to Ephraim as Eagle, an untrained eagle.
Right, a calf, right?
It's a buka, in Hebrew is Eagle. Eagle could be pronounced as angle. The iron becomes an an. Angle is another way of saying eagle. And the Angles on the continent before they moved to England, they're also sometimes referred to as Angloid. And the name Angle is sometimes written in Ptolemy and other places we find it written as Eagle. In other words, the two forms, Eagle and Angle, were used by the Angles for themselves. And they use this name, and we associate England with Ephraim. And the very name England actually means land of the bull calf. And the bull calf is a nickname for Ephraim, as the Jeremiah says and other sources show us. So here too we have a linguistic evidence, and this is combined with other proofs, archaeological evidence and legends.
Wow.
And legends from a lot of different fields of study.